Well, we're at the end of the year, Nick. We're judging. I take you back to Josh Taylor and Jack Catterall. The Ben Eubank fiasco, as we heard there towards the end in the package. Amateur boxing out of the Olympics in 2028. Just a few of the things that we can mull over, a few of the negative things, but give us your take on boxing as a whole. How would you rate it this year?
I think it's been a really difficult year. There's been some incredible highs, as we heard then in the package. You know, there's been some wonderful singular moments, and there's been some incredible journeys, especially in the women's side of the game. But overall, if I was going to give a score to boxing, certainly British boxing from our viewpoint, from our island, I would say probably a D-, and it would have been a lot lower, Gareth, if it wasn't for, as I say, the standard and the performances by some of our female fighters this year. I think it's been a really tough year outside of the ropes, and I think inside the ropes there's been highlighted to us that the sport must and has to do better. We're just not getting the fights when they need to happen, and when the fights do happen, all too often, the officiating, the judging, the administrative side of the sport is letting these athletes down.
Yeah. I mean, as a correspondent myself on the sport, one of the things I've found difficult writing is the narrative of the year in terms of the structure that the sport has. And it's been one of those years, as you say, that's pinpointed so many of those things, that's highlighted so many of the things. Like you say, we're not getting the fights we want. The structure doesn't protect the sport in the right way. There's no governing body, a world governing body that pulls it back into shape. Does do the strictures in place, do the layers in place with the structure of the sport, protect it when it most needs it? No. You know, in the amateur side of the sport, we'll come onto all of this. You know, can we afford to lose Olympic boxing by 2028? No. Exactly. In Los Angeles, we're going to have it in Paris in 2024, but the IOC are saying it's IBA now, not AIBA. Umar Kremlev, who's the president now, the Russian, if you can't get the stuff in place, you ain't going to be in the Olympics. It's a massive loss. Those are some of the negatives I'm picking out there. We've looked at the negatives. As you say, there have been highlights. Before we get into the specifics, what sticks out for you as some of the standout moments over the last 12 months?
The standout moments, absolutely, with some of the female fights. Again, we've got to start with the girls, because, you know, the girls have really taken over, you know, and while I'm a big advocate for improving some of the girls, certainly the girls at the very top, to 3-minute rounds, I think that's destined to be their future. I think we can't deny that this year it's been the girls that have delivered time and time again. Of course, we started the year in spring with a sensational fight, the first ever all-female main event at Madison Square Garden, where Katie Taylor took on Amanda Serrano. That fight absolutely delivered in spades. It was wonderful, a wonderful attraction. Hopefully we see part 2 next year, which would be great. Then, of course, we got Savannah Marshall taking on Clarissa Shields here in the UK as well. That was a huge rematch, a huge grudge match. It was very much a one-sided fight when it played out, but that's set up again to provide us with a potential rubber match in the new year. So that was a fight that delivered. And again, you know, there was even close to my hometown, we had a lot of girls unifying belts. British girls doing incredible things, but of course I've got to highlight a girl who's close to my heart, who I've known since she was an amateur, and that's Natasha Jonas, who retired from the sport, Gareth, came back in 2022 to give it one last crack, moved up to super welterweight, had 3 fights and unified 3 world title belts. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I mean, Tasha Jonas, you know, we'll come on to that later. For me, is clearly in the running for for the fighter of the year.
Yeah.
No question about that. As you say, the women's boxing was extraordinary. I think we got, you know, just chronologically, I think we'll come on to all of this eventually, but I think we got an amazing event with Khan Brook, even though it was 5 years late.
Event of the year, wasn't it?
I think it was one of the. It was Yeah, there's an argument for that. I mean, I was at the two Fury Stadium fights, and we'll come on to that and dispute that. But being at those events was something special. Obviously, I'm there broadcasting for talkSPORT. I get to go into the Fury dressing room, so maybe that's coloured my view a little bit of it in terms
Yeah.
of the Fury show. But Khan Brook, indoors, Manchester Arena, just reminded me of the Ricky Hatton days of old. It was an amazing atmosphere that night, wasn't it?
It wasn't just the night, though, was it, as well? It was the 3 days leading up to it.
Yeah.
It felt like a huge fight.
Yeah.
It felt massive, just being in around the weigh-ins, the hotel, the media. It felt like a huge fight. Everybody in Manchester was talking about it. Every boxing fan in the UK was getting excited about it. And yes, it was probably a couple of years too late, as it proved inside the ring. Amir just was a shadow of the fighter he once was. But it wasn't necessarily about what happened when the bell went. It was everything that led up to it, even right up to Kell Brook's ring walk, which has always been an iconic ring walk. But when they had the live pianist in the Manchester Arena, it just went to a whole new level. So, yeah, I think I have to agree with you. In terms of event of the year domestically, that's got to be right up there. It was a bit special.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to come on to fighter of the year, fight of the year in the next couple of sections. Let's go long for a minute because Taylor-Serrano is mentioned there. It was an extraordinary event as well. One of those events that I shall always remember. The fight week was extraordinary. They'd marshalled and marketed it brilliantly as well. First female fight ever to headline Madison Square Garden. We know what the magic dust is like is there in 140 years of the history of the place. The heart of Manhattan, the news pulse. They were on the equivalent of Good Morning Britain, Great Britain. I'll get that right in a minute. What's it called? Good Morning Britain. There we go.
Okay.
Good Morning USA. They were on that show together. They delighted the audience. The arena was sold out. Billie Jean King was saying something. Female senators were all involved. All the female boxers in the world seemed to be there. Caressa Shields was there, and Alicia Baumgardner. And boy, they delivered. And they really delivered. And you know what? I'm going to disagree with you on the minutes in the rounds. I think women's boxing should go to 12-2s, first of all, before it goes to 3s. We could argue about this forever. Because I just think women deliver in 2-minute rounds. I know that the knockouts don't come, but the action delivered. And I think that was emblematic of that, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, nobody can look back at Taylor versus Serrano 1 at Madison Square Garden back in, was it April? And have any kind of dispute about it. It never delivered, because for 20 minutes it absolutely delivered, and even the judges were divided. It was a split decision. I could see that. I could see both girls winning that fight. I thought it was really close and really sets us up, hopefully, for a sensational rematch in 2023. But, I think there is a bigger conversation to have here, because you've got, at one end of the spectrum, you've got girls who are domestic level, let's be honest, fighting 10 2-minute rounds. And then you've got the likes of Katie Taylor and Chris Shields, established former world and Olympic medalists, multiple weight world champions, fighting over the same distance that basically a novice man would fight over, just for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I think we are kind of robbing ourselves of some even more action. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Gareth. How can anyone dispute that Taylor-Serrano 1 wasn't absolutely perfect? Because it was punch perfect.
Yeah, I'll never ever forget it. It was just unbelievable. And let's hope that. And again, you and I have been around a long time. We've known each other a long time in this sport, and to get an event next year, to get a women's outdoor event at, say, Croke Park with 80,000 in there, with women headlining. I've always said, and I've said it for 10 years. Since Katie Taylor won at the Olympics in 2012, they could have put her on against Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, rather. Minnie Mouse, not even Mickey Mouse. Minnie
That's
Mouse.
A different show altogether, obviously. But you're right.
They could sell it out, 10 years that's been there for her, really.
Honestly, they could announce it, Christmas week, and say Katie Taylor, Croke Park in April, May, open stadium, without an undercard, and simply by saying Katie Taylor versus TBA, and every kid in Ireland would find a ticket in their Christmas stocking come Christmas morning, because it's the biggest fight in the whole of UK and Ireland to be made in 2023. it's competing alongside Fury AJ as the biggest fight we can make domestically. Because Katie Taylor's such an absolute superstar. And again, doesn't matter who's in the opposite corner. I personally hope it is Serrano. But you know what? A bit later in the show, I've got another idea as well.
Well, I can guess. Is she Liverpudlian?
She is Liverpudlian, funnily enough.
and it's not Molly McCann. There we go. Look, let's while we're on this long section and we're just looking at the year, I think let's talk about the heavyweights next. As I said, 2 Fury fights. There were 2 Fury fights at Wembley and Spurs, and 150 odd thousand people in those 2 events. We got Anthony Joshua against Alexander Usyk in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. That was a fantastic event, and it was fascinating. And we heard Anthony Joshua there saying, I'm not a 12-round fighter. Very emotional at the end of that. And then around about that time, we got the return of Deontay Wilder and the success of Joyce. Let's try and encapsulate there maybe what we saw from the heavyweights. What kind of year, in your view, has it been for those 3 leading British heavyweights? Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, and Joyce.
I think Joyce can be the only one that ends the year with any kind of fond memories of 2022, in my opinion. I know Tyson had 2 massive stadium events, but I was at the Wembley event. At the time, I gave Dillian Whyte no more than a puncher's chance, and that proved as so. I've got to be honest, I didn't even bother travelling down to London to watch the Chisora fiasco because it was a non-event, and for me, that's really disappointing because I want to see the best versus the best. I want to see Tyson Fury, who's the best heavyweight of this era, define his legacy. And I think in 2022, he not only did he tread water, I think he went backwards a little bit, because I've seen him beat up Chisora a couple of times before, and nothing was ever going to change at Wembley, at Tottenham's stadium. So that was really disappointing from Tyson Fury's perspective. Alexander Usyk, of course, only fought once this year. That was the performance against AJ. He's obviously tied up with a lot of things going on in his homeland and stuff, so you can kind of excuse him. I would have liked to have seen AJ get out again before the back end of the year. If the Tyson thing wasn't going to happen, it would have been nice to see him in with just somebody, just to see him get back in there and shake off those demons a little bit. So for me, the only domestic heavyweight really that's come out of it, I know Daniel Dubois picked up a trinket over in Miami for what that was worth. But the only one who can kind of come away was Joyce. I thought Joyce had a couple of good wins this year. He beat up Christian Hammer at the start of the year, the former European champion. That was in the summer. And then I thought against Joyce in September, Joseph Parker, in September up in Manchester. I thought that was a great performance from Joyce. So he's the one I'm really excited about going into 2023. But these fights have got to happen now, Gareth. We've got Joyce, Wilder, Joshua, Usyk, Fury. It's not hard. The permutations are there. They've got to fight one another in 2023. Yeah,
the one thing, I'll take slight issue with you over Fury Chisora being a non-event. That's fine you saying it that way, but to get 50, 60,000 people in the outdoor stadium in December.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is honestly amazing. And
I don't know how Frank managed that. I don't know. That was a masterstroke.
Well, it's the Fury show, isn't it? He's crossed over. He's definitely crossed over. There's this huge Netflix series coming out about him, which I think is going to be fascinating next summer. It's going to make him even bigger. Third best-selling book. He's finally got commercial deals now where he's doing these Furosity drinks and all of those things, and the caffeine bubble gum, and he's got the Christmas single out, Sweet Caroline. There's something to be said.
But none of that's actually sports entertainment.
No, it isn't. It isn't sports entertainment. But he was box office. I know because I was standing right behind him, and I thought as it was about to kick off with the microphone for talkSPORT, as it was about to kick off in the corner of the ring after the Chisora fight, I thought, oh no, I am actually going to get crushed here for once. Just stand still, stay in the eye of the storm, hold the microphone. What happened with he and Usyk and Joyce in the corner was formative for next year.
That was the best thing about the entire night.
Yeah,
I've got to be honest.
But honestly, when we went to the press conference afterwards, he was a box office.
Yeah,
we had Bob Arum, 91-year-old Bob Arum, in a scarf, a hat, gloves, a coat, from Las Vegas, sitting on one side, and Frank Warren with a bad back, and I hope Frank's well again, sitting on the other side of him. And they were box office, but Tyson Fury was box office at the press conference. And everything he said was true, I think. Joyce is a harder challenge for me now than Usyk on paper, you know? And he addressed it all honestly. And we, you know, sometimes when you leave, you think, oh my God, we've got every line we wanted here. Anthony Joshua was not to be seen. I'd love to have seen him there supporting his pal Derek Chisora. And I'm not knocking Anthony Joshua there. And I'm not a Fury fanboy, even though I was on stage with him last weekend at Indigo in London. It's work. It's being around people who are in our sport, who are big figures in our sport. I agree with you. He didn't advance his legacy cause in 2022. For me, I'd like to see him fight those two and Joshua. Usyk, Joyce and Joshua. For Fury, then, the era's done.
Yeah.
In my view. But then I want to see Wilder in 2023. It looks like Anthony Joshua is going the Dillian White, maybe the Deontay Wilder as his second fight. It's a very dangerous fight for him. But Anthony, if you beat Deontay Wilder, everybody brings you back in the fold, and we've all got opinions. It's just us and our opinions. But you're back in the fold. You're back right up there. There's certain fights we need to see. This one of the disappointments of 2022 for me, Nick, that we got teased with the Fury-Joshua fight again for a month. I never thought it was going to happen. We're both tight in on the narrative. Never thought it was going to happen. And as you say, I completely agree with you. Joe Joyce's stock has risen. And the mouth-watering prospect of Fury and Joshua for the undisputed in 2022, first time in 20-odd years. Joyce and Usyk, Joyce and Wilder, Joyce and Joshua, Fury and Joshua. They're fights that can sustain the heavyweight division for the next 18 months, not just next year or next 2 years. Final thing, really, I suppose, before we talk about fight of the year, and the things that we may have learnt from this year. I think we've talked about some of the things we might have learnt from this year. Do we think that Saul Canelo Alvarez is still number one pound for pound? Before we just go to the next section, who's your pound for pound number one at the end of this year?
It's definitely not Canelo, and you know, he remains the pound for pound number one pay-per-view driver. He remains the biggest meal ticket in the sport, but he's certainly not the pound for pound best boxer on the planet. I think it's becoming increasingly tough to rank Terence Crawford at the top, purely based on the fact that he's not actually fighting anybody. We need that fight with Errol Spence. That's the defining fight, which will really push him back to the top of the list. So for me, it's a conversation between three people. I think Dimitri Bivol had a sensational year. I think he will come into the reckoning of fight of the year, but I don't think he's quite done enough for me. So it's between Naoya Inoue, who we seen just last week take on Paul Butler Tuesday morning here in the UK, who is the undisputed bantamweight champion of the world and an absolutely ferocious puncher. But for me, I think at the top of the list, and nothing's changed from the start of the year. He only had one fight. He solidified his greatness with that performance against Joshua. I've got Alexander Usyk at the top of my pound-for-pound list, the undisputed and unified cruiserweight champion, and now the unified heavyweight champion of the world. I think remains for me the target for everybody to look up towards.